So I did the Alleluia this morning because today is when we begin what's referred to commonly as the O antiphons, and they're really beautiful and they're theologically rich. So I didn't want to, I think Alleluia really should be sung, so I don't do it in the mornings, but I just couldn't let these ones pass by because it's the only time in the year we get them. But what this means then is we're now entering into a very concentrated time. So even the church would refer to this time that we've begun today as a privileged season. So like no memorials are allowed. Everything is very strictly controlled from now until the birth of Christ. And so the readings, as if they weren't intense already, have intensified all the more. What is super loud in the readings today is a twofold thing. One is that Jesus is the fulfillment and the culmination of all of history. And from the Jewish mindset, their history is human history. And so we're getting our first reading from Genesis that is anticipating and pointing forward to the birth of Christ, where God promises that the scepter shall not pass from Judah. And so they knew that a royal figure, and this is way before David was even born, a royal figure of prominence that is going to have sort of eschatological impact, meaning like ultimate fulfillment of God's plan impact, is going to come from this tribe of Judah, while tribute is brought to him and he receives the people's homage. Now, in a certain extent, David fulfills that, and we heard in the genealogy that it begins with Abraham, and that's because Matthew is speaking to Jewish Christians. So if you notice, it doesn't begin with Adam. Luke will do that because he's focused more on the Gentiles who really couldn't care less about Abraham. But for the Jews, Abraham's like the starting point, and it goes through Judah, and right in the middle there is the figure of David. So in a certain sense, David, who arises out of the tribe of Judah, is a messianic kind of character. I mean, under David's rule, the world itself is oriented towards God, and even foreign nations are traveling in, and they're learning and discovering God and proclaiming that Yahweh is the true God. And for them, it ushered in this time of peace that was particularly pronounced with Solomon. They were flourishing, their families were growing, they had peace on all sides. I mean, this was this epic time of ushered in grace. And so David really, in their minds, is almost the Messiah himself. And yet, obviously, as we know because of his story, he was not. But the psalm speaks to that reign coming back in like an ultimate way where it's not going to be violated by sin. You know, and it speaks of this character. He shall defend the afflicted among the people, save the children of the poor. Justice shall flower in his days, and profound peace till the moon be no more, meaning it will never be taken away from them once it's been given. May he rule from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. And that ultimately is going to be fulfilled in the person of Christ through the church, which really does become the kingdom which swallows up the world. And what Matthew is trying to say is Jesus Christ is the one that you are waiting for. And so even the way he breaks down the generations to 14 to 14 to 14, for the Jews, numbers matter, and that spells David. So when they see that the generations are broken this way, it's literally screaming the word David to them as a Jewish people. That might mean a whole lot of nothing to us who are Gentile insertions into the body of God's plan, but it should mean a lot, because while we didn't benefit from the Jewish history of all that David was, we had a worse experience in our Gentile history and memory banks of kingdoms that were nothing like David. And how many empires have we seen in human history that care absolutely nothing for God, that have already passed and are still going? I think of some of the Asian countries right now where you're not allowed to believe anything. You're not allowed to even look at Google Maps. You can't see anything. You're utterly cut off from the world because you're only fed the steady diet of what the government thinks is right for you because it keeps them in power and control. How many of them are starving? How many people currently live in countries where the slave trade is active and real, particularly in Muslim-based countries? And so for the Gentile perspective, this kind of promise is like unimaginable. And yet it's precisely what Christ comes to usher into the world, not just for the Jews, but for all. And so this really is an occasion for us to rejoice, because the love, the peace, the favor, the grace, the flourishing, the prominence, the abundance that God has promised his people is also promised to us.